They can dictate the collapse of markets, dictate the flow of news to over 1 billion people, and are the invisible architects of our reality. Yet, while their empire shouts to the world, they themselves say nothing, living as ghosts hidden behind a $70 billion fortune. The name of that family? The Thomsons. How can the kings of media rule in absolute silence without any oversight? For the Thomsons, their most prized possession, the one thing they guard more fiercely than their billions, is their own invisibility. They are the hermit kings of the information age, phantoms who rule from the shadows. This isn't just another story about the accumulation of money. It's a gripping, deeply human paradox of immense power and profound, almost pathological secrecy. Today we are pulling back that curtain to embark on a deep dive into this enigmatic dynasty. Grounded in credible sources from Forbes profiles and historical accounts in the Canadian Encyclopedia, to the intimate details found in rare biographical works, this story blends established fact with careful interpretation, avoiding empty speculation. It is an exploration of the strategy, the psychology, and the hidden costs of strategic invisibility. Get ready for a story of ambition, isolation, and the quiet contradictions of the world's most powerful and most invisible family. What happens to the human soul when a family's greatest legacy is not what they built, but how effectively they hid? To understand the Thomson dynasty's profound aversion to the spotlight, you cannot begin in a gleaming boardroom or a London mansion. You must travel back in time to the harsh, unforgiving landscape of rural Canada in the 1930s. The Great Depression had descended not as a sudden crash, but as a slow, suffocating fog. In the vast, isolated stretches of Ontario where the winters were long and the communities were small, this wasn't just an economic crisis. It was an existential one. Life was a daily struggle against the elements, against debt, against a pervasive sense of being forgotten by the wider world. The silence of the vast snow-covered fields could be deafening, the isolation a palpable weight on the human spirit. It was into this world of hardship and silence that a new technology began to whisper: radio. Today we think of it as a quaint relic, but in the 1930s, it was magic. It was a voice in the dark, a thread of connection that could pierce the thickest walls of isolation. For a farmer listening in his barn after a day of back-breaking labor, or a family huddled around the hearth on a freezing night, the radio was more than just a box of wires and tubes. It was a lifeline. It brought the music of the city, the news of the world, the shared story that reminded them they were part of something larger. It was the original social media, a one-way conversation that nonetheless felt deeply personal, a promise that they were not alone. This unique environment, a crucible of economic desperation and a deep human yearning for connection, was the fertile ground from which the Thomson Empire would unexpectedly grow. At its center was a man whose character was forged by these very conditions, Roy Thomson. Born in Toronto in 1894, he was not a child of privilege. His father was a local barber, a trade that placed him at the very heart of his community. A barbershop in the early 20th century was a social hub, a place where the stories, gossip, financial worries, and quiet hopes of ordinary people were exchanged daily. Growing up in this environment, Roy would have absorbed an intuitive, grassroots understanding of the common person, their needs, their desires, their anxieties. He understood from a young age that people weren't driven by grand ideologies, but by the practicalities of daily life. His family's Scottish immigrant roots instilled in him a powerful set of values, drawn from the wellspring of Presbyterianism. This wasn't just a religious affiliation, it was a complete worldview. It championed the Protestant work ethic, a belief that hard work and worldly success were signs of divine grace. But it came with a crucial caveat: humility. The fruits of one's labor were not to be flaunted. Frugality, perseverance, and a low-profile existence were moral imperatives. To display wealth, to seek the public's adulation, was a sign of vanity, a profound moral failing. This cultural DNA, this deep-seated belief that one's work should speak for itself, would become the guiding principle of Roy's life and the unwritten constitution of the dynasty he would one day found. He wasn't just a private man by nature, he was a private man by conviction. Before he found success, Roy Thomson learned the bitter taste of failure. As a young man, he tried his hand at farming in the unforgiving prairies of Manitoba. This wasn't a gentleman's farm, it was a brutal, relentless struggle against the Canadian climate. He faced back-breaking labor, searing summer heat, bone-chilling winters, and the constant threat of crushing debt. Ultimately, the farm failed. This experience, which might have broken another man, became the crucible that forged Roy's unshakable pragmatism. He learned in the most visceral way possible that romantic ideals and wishful thinking didn't put food on the table. Business, he concluded, had to be about cold, hard, unsentimental numbers. It was a lesson he would never forget. His next venture brought him directly into the homes of the people he would one day serve. He became a traveling radio salesman, crisscrossing rural Ontario during the depths of the Depression. Imagine the scene: a determined man knocking on the doors of cash-strapped families, trying to convince them to part with their precious savings for this newfangled piece of technology. He would have seen poverty and resilience up close in hundreds of kitchens and living rooms. To succeed, he had to be more than a salesman. He had to be a psychologist, an evangelist for connection. He wasn't just selling a product, he was selling the cure for loneliness. He learned that what people valued most, what they would sacrifice for, even in the hardest of times, was a link to the world beyond their doorstep. It was the most profound market research of his life. This journey led him to his watershed moment. In 1931, with a small amount of capital, Roy Thomson made a purchase that seemed utterly insignificant at the time. For the modest sum of $201, he acquired a small, struggling radio station in North Bay, Ontario, CFCH. North Bay was not a cultural metropolis. It was a rugged, resource-based town, built on forestry and the railway. Roy's strategy for the station was as pragmatic as he was. He didn't try to emulate the slick programming of the big cities. Instead, he turned CFCH into an essential local utility. It provided what the community desperately needed: local news, weather forecasts for farmers and loggers, community announcements, and music to fill the silence. He wasn't trying to become a media mogul. He was simply serving an underserved market. And in doing so, he saw a clear and repeatable path to profit. From radio, he made a logical, calculated leap into print. In 1934, he bought the Timmins Daily Press. Timmins, like North Bay, was a hard-working northern town, the center of a major gold rush. For the miners and their families, the local newspaper was as essential as a pickaxe. It carried job listings, commodity prices, legal notices, and the vital social news that held the community together. Once again, Roy saw that information, whether broadcast through the air or printed on paper, was not a luxury. It was a utility, as vital as electricity or water. It was during this period of humble, methodical expansion that he articulated the motto that would define his entire career: a phrase both shockingly blunt and brilliantly simple. I buy newspapers to make money to buy more newspapers. In that single sentence lies the entire Thomson philosophy. It was devoid of the high-minded, self-aggrandizing rhetoric of other press barons, like William Randolph Hearst, who saw their papers as tools to shape nations and wage personal crusades. For Roy, there was no such romance. He was not in the journalism business. He was in the profitable information delivery business. He rarely, if ever, interfered with the editorial content of his papers. He didn't care what his editors wrote as long as the advertisements were sold and the books were balanced. This seemingly benign hands-off approach would have enormous unforeseen consequences for the future of media. On the surface, Roy Thomson's early career can be seen as a story of information democratization. By acquiring and investing in small-town radio stations and newspapers, he was giving a voice and a vital service to communities that were often ignored by the major media centers in Toronto or Montreal. He was, in a very real sense, strengthening the fabric of local Canadian life, one small market at a time. He was building connections, fostering community, and expanding access to information. But beneath this positive narrative lies a more complex and unsettling legacy. His purely commercial, relentlessly hands-off approach created a new model of media ownership, one that separated financial control from any sense of civic or journalistic mission. This precedent of detached ownership, where a single remote entity could accumulate a vast portfolio of media outlets with the sole objective of maximizing profit, was revolutionary. In the short term, it ironically protected editorial independence, as Roy genuinely had little interest in the content itself. But in the long term, it laid the groundwork for a future media landscape where hedge funds and private equity firms could acquire local newspapers with the same unsentimental bottom-line mentality, often leading to devastating cuts in newsrooms, a decline in quality, and the creation of news deserts in the very communities Roy Thomson had once sought to serve. Without ever intending to, the humble son of a barber from Toronto, through his simple and relentless pursuit of profitable utilities, had become the unintentional architect of a model that would one day raise profound and troubling questions about the concentration of media power. He was building an empire, brick by humble brick, all while remaining a virtual unknown outside of the small towns he served. The foundation of both his family's immense wealth and their profound invisibility was being laid, not in the pursuit of fame or influence, but in the quiet, methodical, and relentless service of the bottom line. Here is the second part of the story, continuing from the foundations laid in part one, and detailing the dramatic rise of the Thomson Empire. As the world plunged into the chaos of the Second World War, Roy Thomson's unassuming, profit-driven model of media ownership proved to be uniquely suited for the times. While other publishers wrestled with ideology and the grand narratives of the global conflict, Roy remained focused on his core mission, providing an essential service. In an era of profound uncertainty, information was not a luxury. It was a critical piece of infrastructure. News from the European front, reports on industrial production for the war effort, details of rationing at home, this was the vital data that kept a nation functioning. Roy's newspapers, unburdened by the political baggage or editorial crusades of their big city counterparts, became trusted, indispensable utilities in the small Canadian towns they served. The war acted as a powerful accelerant to his buy to make money to buy more strategy. With information at a premium, his existing properties became more profitable than ever, providing him with the capital to expand his network. He moved with quiet, methodical precision, acquiring one small paper after another. By 1949, his portfolio had swelled to include 19 newspapers, making him a formidable, if still largely unheralded force in Canadian media. His growing influence was recognized by his peers, who elected him as a leader in the Canadian Daily Newspaper Publishers Association. Here, too, he was not the charismatic visionary or the thundering orator. He was the quiet operator in the corner of the room, the one who understood the balance sheets better than anyone else, the man whose simple, repeatable formula for success was both baffling and deeply respected by publishers who ran their businesses with far more passion but far less profit. It was during this period of steady, almost predictable growth that Roy made a series of moves that revealed the true unconventional genius of his business mind. He began a quiet but significant program of diversification into ventures that had absolutely nothing to do with the media. He bought ice cream factories. He invested in hairstyling salons. He acquired companies that manufactured auto parts. To his media contemporaries, these moves must have seemed bizarre, almost comical. Why would a burgeoning press baron be interested in the margins on a haircut or the supply chain for a dairy? But for Roy, the logic was crystal clear and utterly devoid of sentiment. He understood, perhaps better than anyone, the inherent volatility of the media business. It was cyclical, vulnerable to economic downturns, and dependent on the fickle whims of advertising budgets. Hard assets and consumer staples, on the other hand, were different. People would always need haircuts, and they would always buy ice cream as an affordable treat, even in tough times. These businesses were his financial bedrock, a classic hedging strategy that insulated his core media operations from risk. They were his secret weapon. While other media owners were leveraged with debt, constantly courting advertisers or battling for market share in a cutthroat industry, Roy had a diversified, reliable stream of cash flow. This financial independence was the true source of his power. It gave him the freedom to act decisively, to expand aggressively, and to wait patiently for the perfect opportunity to make his next and most audacious move. He was building not just a media company, but a self-sustaining financial fortress, all in preparation for a leap that would take him far beyond the familiar shores of Canada. By the early 1950s, Roy Thomson was the undisputed king of small-town Canadian media. He had perfected his formula and built a formidable, financially secure enterprise. But for a man of his restless ambition, conquering his home turf was not enough. He set his sights on the ultimate test, Great Britain. In 1952, he made the monumental decision to move to Edinburgh. One must pause to appreciate the sheer audacity of this move. He was leaving a world where he was a big fish in a small pond, a world he understood intimately, to willingly become a nobody in the ancient, deeply class-conscious society of the United Kingdom. He was a Canadian colonial, unpolished and without pedigree, attempting to break into the closed, clubby world of the British establishment. His motivation was not simply to make more money, it was to prove that his unsentimental, numbers-driven philosophy of business could succeed on the world stage. His entry ticket into this rarefied world was the 1953 acquisition of the Scotsman. This was not just another local paper, it was a venerable, deeply respected institution, a pillar of Scottish civic and cultural life for over a century. The skepticism he faced was immense. The British press viewed him as a provincial upstart, a backwoodsman who couldn't possibly understand the subtle traditions of Fleet Street. He was the outsider, the colonial, who had come to buy a piece of their heritage. Roy's response was not to try and win them over with charm or wit. for he possessed little of either. Instead, he deployed the only tools he had: capital and common sense. He invested heavily in the paper, upgrading its technology and resources. And crucially, he honored his long-standing principle of non-interference, leaving the editorial staff to do their work without meddling from the owner's office. He proved through action rather than words that his primary interest was in running a successful business, not in imposing his own views. His reputation as a shrewd operator grew, and in 1957 he seized upon the opportunity that would transform his financial fortunes forever: Scottish television. This was the dawn of commercial television in the UK, a brand new frontier. The government granted a limited number of broadcast licenses, and securing one was akin to being given a key to the Royal Mint. The advertising revenue was immense, the competition minimal. It was this venture that prompted Roy's most famous and revealing quote. When asked what he enjoyed most about his new television business, he answered with characteristic bluntness, "It's a license to print money." The quote became legendary, perfectly encapsulating his philosophy. It also highlighted the stark contrast between the glamorous new medium of television and the man who now controlled a piece of it. He had no interest in the magic of the screen, the stars it created, or the culture it shaped. He was interested only in the spectacular, unprecedented profitability of the enterprise. With a river of television money now at his disposal, Roy went on a buying spree that stunned the British media establishment. In 1959, he acquired the massive Kemsley Group, a network of prestigious regional newspapers, including the Sunday Times. This single, audacious transaction made him a major national player overnight. But the true pinnacle, the acquisition that symbolized his complete conquest of the British media landscape, came in 1967. He purchased the Times of London, cementing his control over Britain's most prestigious paper. This was not just a newspaper. It was an institution, the paper of record, the official voice of the British establishment for generations. The son of a Canadian barber now owned the very newspaper that was delivered to Buckingham Palace every morning. The establishment, having failed to stop him, did the next best thing. They absorbed him. In 1964, in recognition of his immense power and influence, Roy Thomson was elevated to the peerage, becoming Baron Thomson of Fleet. For a man who had spent his life focused on balance sheets, this was a moment of profound personal significance. It was perhaps the one instance where his pragmatism intersected with a quiet, deeply buried desire for legacy and acceptance. The title was a strategic asset, granting him a level of access and respect that his unpolished Canadian persona never could. He was now officially an insider. Yet, even with a lordship to his name, Roy never truly became one of them. He remained at his core the practical Canadian he had always been. A fascinating and deeply humanizing detail reveals the internal conflict he navigated. For years, he sent out 2 different sets of Christmas cards. One, formal and stately, was for his new circle of British aristocrats and politicians, signed Thomson of Fleet. The other, simple and unpretentious, was for his old friends and family back home, signed simply Roy. This small gesture speaks volumes. It highlights his cultural duality, the sense of a man living between two worlds, fully belonging to neither. He was Lord Thomson in the boardrooms of London, but in his heart, he was still Roy from Timmins. This persistent feeling of being a perpetual outsider, even at the very apex of the establishment, is a crucial psychological key to understanding the entire Thomson dynasty. It became the root of their reclusiveness. Roy was in the establishment, but he was never truly of it. He was a guest in their house, not a member of the family. This sense of separateness, of being an observer rather than a participant, was a trait he would pass down to his son and grandson. It would evolve from a personal quirk into a guiding family ethos, the very foundation of their decision to wield immense power from a position of profound self-imposed isolation. Having conquered the commanding heights of the British media, the Thomson Empire, now under the growing influence of Roy's son Kenneth, embarked on a new phase of evolution in the 1970s and 80s. This was a period of shrewd diversification and strategic retreat, a time when the family began to pivot away from the noisy, high-profile world of newspapers and towards the quiet, anonymous, and immensely profitable world of data. Another stroke of pragmatic genius came in the 1970s, when Roy partnered with the famously frugal and eccentric American billionaire, J. Paul Getty, to invest in North Sea oil exploration. This was not a media play. It was a pure, high-stakes gamble on energy and resources. The gamble paid off spectacularly, yielding billions in profit and providing the family with a financial cushion so vast it made them virtually immune to the economic cycles of the media industry. This immense wealth allowed them to make a decision that would have been unthinkable for any other media baron. In 1981, they sold the Times and the Sunday Times. To the outside world, this was shocking. Why would they sell their crown jewels, the very symbols of their prestige and power? The answer lies at the core of the Thomson family psyche. The papers, for all their influence, were a constant headache. They were a financial drain, perpetually embroiled in bitter and costly battles with the powerful print unions. More importantly, they attracted exactly the kind of relentless public scrutiny the increasingly private family had come to despise. The sale of the papers to the flamboyant, attention-seeking Rupert Murdoch was deeply symbolic. It was a changing of the guard, a conscious and deliberate retreat from the messy, contentious front lines of daily journalism. The Thomsons were trading public glory for private profit. They were moving from the volatile world of shaping public opinion to the stable, predictable world of providing essential information. This pivot became the central strategy of the modern Thomson Empire. They began acquiring legal and academic publishers, scientific journals, and financial data providers. In 1996, they made a monumental acquisition, purchasing West Publishing, a cornerstone of the American legal information system. The brilliance of this strategy cannot be overstated. Legal, financial, and scientific data isn't sexy. It doesn't win Pulitzer Prizes or make its owners famous. But it is utterly essential to the functioning of modern society. It's sold on high-margin, multi-year subscription models, creating a stable, ever-flowing river of revenue. The Thomsons were effectively cornering the market on the invisible plumbing of the information age. They were becoming the essential, unseen infrastructure upon which other, more visible businesses depended. This decades-long transformation reached its triumphant apotheosis in 2008. In a blockbuster deal valued at $17.2 billion, the Thomson Corporation, now a quiet giant of niche data, acquired Reuters, one of the world's oldest, largest, and most prestigious news organizations. This was the final masterful act. The merger created the ultimate information hybrid, a globally respected boots-on-the-ground news-gathering operation perfectly integrated with a high-profit, technologically advanced data and analytics business. They now had it all: the prestige of a legendary news brand and the immense profitability of a data utility. Fast forward to 2025, and the empire remains powerful and elusive. Thomson Reuters has grown to a market value measured in the tens of billions. Recent figures hover in the $55 to $65 billion range, cementing its status as a global information giant. The family, through its secretive private holding company, Woodbridge, maintains roughly 2/3 of the voting power, an unusually high level of control for a company of this scale. They are at the cutting edge of information technology, rolling out sophisticated AI programs like AI for Justice to help legal nonprofits, tools designed to increase transparency and access to information for others. And therein lies the great modern paradox of the Thomson family. They are pioneers in a world that demands radical transparency, yet their own family and business operations remain more opaque than ever. The ethical debates that now swirl around AI and data privacy are simply the 21st century evolution of the same questions their secret power has always raised. Their unique economic structure is the fortress wall that enables this profound privacy. Unlike publicly traded rivals who must answer to the whims of Wall Street every quarter, the Thomsons are insulated from short-term pressures. They can plan in terms of generations, not fiscal quarters. This long-term vision, this patient capital, is the ultimate luxury. It has allowed them to meticulously build a global information empire while systematically erasing their own public footprint, a feat of corporate and personal discipline without parallel in the modern world. Here is the third part of the story. This section delves into the lives of the key figures who shaped the Thomson dynasty, exploring the personalities and psychological forces behind their empire of silence. An empire, no matter how vast or technologically advanced, is not a self-perpetuating machine. It is a human creation, forged and molded by the personalities, passions, and private struggles of the individuals at its helm. To truly understand the Thomson dynasty's paradoxical embrace of power and secrecy, we must now move beyond the balance sheets and the acquisition timelines. We must step behind the corporate curtain and into the private worlds of the three men who in succession built and guarded this empire of silence. Roy, the pragmatic founder, Kenneth, the sensitive inheritor, and David, the enigmatic guardian. Their individual stories, each distinct yet inextricably linked, reveal the very human origins of one of the world's most inhumanly private families. Roy Thomson, the founder, was a man carved from the bedrock of the Canadian Shield, tough, practical, and utterly unsentimental. We have seen his business acumen, his relentless drive to turn information into a profitable utility. But to comprehend the dynasty he created, we must look deeper into the character of the man himself. His defining trait, beyond his ambition, was a profound and deeply ingrained modesty that bordered on asceticism. This was most famously captured in the almost mythical stories of his life in London after becoming a baron. Here was one of the wealthiest men in Britain, a member of the House of Lords, who regularly chose to ride the public underground. This wasn't a charming affectation or a publicity stunt. To Roy, it was simple logic. A chauffeured Rolls-Royce was a capital expense, a depreciating asset that produced no revenue. It was, in a word, inefficient. He viewed personal extravagance as a foolish waste of money that could and should be reinvested to buy another newspaper. This philosophy extended to every corner of his life. He was known for his drab, off-the-rack suits and his habit of staying in modest hotels. For Roy, wealth was not something to be enjoyed or displayed. It was a tool, a resource to be perpetually deployed in the service of expansion. His modesty was not just a personal virtue. It was a core component of his business strategy. His family life with his wife Edna Irvin and their 3 children was similarly unpretentious. He was a traditional patriarch of his era, likely more present in his business ledgers than in the daily emotional lives of his children. His focus was singular, almost monomaniacal: the business. He built a world of immense comfort for his family, but it was a world built on the values of frugality and hard work, not leisure and luxury. This pragmatic mindset is the key to understanding his most consequential legacy, the precedent of detached control. On the surface, his aversion to editorial interference appears to be a noble defense of press freedom. The truth, as revealed by his character, is far more practical. To get involved in what his editors wrote was to get involved in the messy, unpredictable, and ultimately unprofitable world of politics and public opinion. It meant taking sides, making enemies, and, worst of all, attracting attention. By remaining studiously detached, he kept his empire clean, efficient, and insulated from controversy. He preserved the independence of his papers not out of a deep-seated idealism, but out of a calculated, almost cold, desire to avoid trouble. He was teaching his descendants a powerful lesson. True power is best wielded from a distance without leaving fingerprints. Control the infrastructure, own the platform, but never get your hands dirty with the messy business of the message itself. In the end, Roy Thomson left behind a staggering paradox. He spent his life building one of the world's greatest communication empires, only to father a family that would, over generations, almost entirely cease to communicate with the outside world. He sought and accepted a public title, becoming a lord of the realm, yet he instilled in his heirs a deep and abiding conviction that the greatest of all luxuries was to be left profoundly and completely alone. If Roy was the scrappy, ambitious founder, his son Kenneth was the sensitive, scholarly inheritor. His was the classic burden of the second generation, born not into struggle, but into a world of immense wealth, privilege, and suffocating expectation. He lacked his father's raw entrepreneurial fire because he never had to build anything from scratch. His character was shaped by a different world, a refined education at Cambridge, the defining experience of service as a flying instructor in the Royal Canadian Air Force during the war. He was, in every sense, a different breed of man. When he inherited the empire in 1976, he did not embark on a radical new course. He was a steward, not a revolutionary. He consolidated his father's gains and professionalized the sprawling, somewhat chaotic collection of businesses into a more coherent corporate structure. His major acquisitions, such as the iconic Canadian retailer Hudson's Bay in 1979 and the nation's most influential newspaper, the Globe and Mail, in 1980, were strategic moves that refined and strengthened the empire's Canadian core. He was an astute and capable businessman, but it was clear that the cut and thrust of the corporate world was not his true passion. That lay elsewhere, in a world of quiet contemplation, beauty, and history. The key to unlocking the soul of Kenneth Thomson is his art collection. This was not the glitzy, investment-driven collecting of the modern billionaire. It was a deep, scholarly, and intensely personal passion. His focus was not on big, flashy contemporary works, but on the intimate and the historical. He amassed the world's greatest private collection of works by the 19th century Canadian landscape painter Cornelius Krieghoff, and he had a particular love for exquisite hand-painted European medieval miniatures, small, perfect worlds he could literally hold in the palm of his hand. His collection was his sanctuary, a tangible and quiet realm where he could exercise a level of personal control and find a depth of beauty that the sprawling abstract empire he managed could never provide. One extraordinary, little-known story reveals more about Kenneth's character than any business deal ever could. In 1977, he arranged a private meeting with the notorious and charismatic British art forger Tom Keating. Keating had publicly boasted of faking numerous works, including some by Krieghoff, the artist Kenneth so cherished. A typical billionaire might have dispatched a team of lawyers and art experts. Kenneth went himself. Imagine the scene: the painfully shy, reclusive Canadian media baron sitting down with the charming, roguish forger, asking him, man to man, to help him identify any fakes in his beloved collection. This quiet, clandestine meeting speaks volumes. It reveals his profound and vulnerable personal connection to his art. It demonstrates his preference for direct, private dealings over public posturing. It shows a man who valued the emotional truth and authenticity of a single painting more than the entire public performance of power. This deep-seated shyness defined his public role. In a rare 1980 interview, he confessed to the strain of his dual identity. In the UK, he was the grand and formal Lord Thomson of Fleet, a title and role he clearly found uncomfortable. Back in Canada, he was simply Ken, an unassuming man who, despite his colossal fortune, lived in a relatively modest home in Toronto's Rosedale neighborhood. He famously never took his seat in the House of Lords, a quiet but definitive rejection of the public life his father had, however ambivalently, embraced. Kenneth was the one who formalized his father's private instincts into a deliberate, unshakable family doctrine of reclusiveness. When he made his final great public gesture, the 2002 donation of his spectacular $300 million art collection to the Art Gallery of Ontario, it was the ultimate act of communication for a man who eschewed communication. He was not giving a speech or an interview. He was giving the world the one thing that truly mattered to him. He was allowing his passion, his soul, to speak for him. A final, magnificent statement from a man who had spent a lifetime perfecting the art of silence. The mantle of this strange and contradictory legacy now rests on the shoulders of David Thomson, the third Baron Thomson of Fleet. If his grandfather was the founder and his father the steward, David is the enigmatic guardian. He inherited a fully formed, hermetically sealed empire, and with it, a tradition of reclusiveness so deeply ingrained that it was no longer a personal preference, but a dynastic imperative. His life has been defined not by the challenge of building, but by the immense and complex burden of guarding this inheritance and navigating its psychological terrain. From a young age, David showed a desire to prove himself on his own terms, outside the long shadow of the family business. After graduating from Cambridge with a history degree, he founded his own private real estate company, Osmington Incorporated, developing it into a highly successful enterprise. This was his clear attempt to echo his grandfather's entrepreneurial fire, to build something of his own, to be more than just an heir. Yet the gravity of the family empire was inescapable. Like his father, David found a private harbor in the world of art. The story of him buying his first significant piece, a drawing by John Constable, at the age of just 19, shows the powerful continuity of this family passion. For the Thomsons, art is not a commodity. It is a language, a private dialogue conducted across generations, a safe space for emotion in a family that actively discourages its public display. But it is in David's personal life that we see the fractures that can appear under the immense pressure of such a legacy. His life has been marked by a series of complex personal relationships, including 4 marriages and 7 children. The painful 2017 lawsuit brought against him by an estranged daughter over the family's labyrinthine trusts was a rare public airing of private grief. It was a stark reminder that when a family's primary interface becomes a set of legal and financial structures, genuine human communication can break down, and relationships can become tragically transactional. Whispers of a profound loneliness have long swirled around David. He is known for his solitary travels and his almost complete absence from the social world his peers inhabit. The most revealing insight into his inner world comes from a powerful and startling quote he once gave. "Traditional businessmen think you're not a real man if you live balanced." Let that sink in. It is a statement of immense psychological weight. It suggests a man at war with the very role he was born to play. He feels the crushing expectation to be a ruthless, single-minded traditional businessman in the mold of his grandfather, while simultaneously yearning for a balanced, more authentic, more human existence. It is the quiet cry of a man who recognizes the deep imbalance in his own life, a man trapped in the most luxurious of gilded cages, fully aware of the profound psychological strain of his position. Today, David Thomson stands as the ultimate product and guardian of his family's legacy. He presides over an empire of information with almost limitless power to communicate, yet by choice, by training, and by the immense weight of tradition, he remains almost entirely silent. He is the guardian of the flame, but also the guardian of the silence, the final embodiment of a paradox that has defined his family for nearly a century. Here's the fourth part of the story. This section delves into the profound emotional and psychological consequences of the Thomson family's generational commitment to reclusiveness, exploring the human tragedy at the heart of their silent empire. Every great dynasty has its defining tragedy. For some, it is a sudden calamitous fall from grace, a public scandal, or a violent severing of power. But for the Thomson family, the tragedy is quieter, more insidious, and far more profound. It is not a single dramatic event that marks their story, but rather a slow generational corrosion of human connection, a creeping isolation born from the very fortress they built to protect themselves. This fortress, meticulously constructed over decades, has a name: Woodbridge. It is their private, family-owned holding company, the legal and financial entity through which they control their vast empire. But Woodbridge is so much more than a corporate structure. It is the central nervous system of their privacy, the physical and philosophical embodiment of their separateness. It is a fortress whose impenetrable walls were designed to shield their immense wealth from the outside world. But those same walls, over time, have also become a kind of prison, cutting them off from the world and at times even from each other. To understand the emotional toll of being a Thomson, one must first understand the architecture of their isolation. Woodbridge is a masterclass in wielding power without presence. It is a black box, deliberately opaque, allowing the family to exert absolute control over one of the world's most important information companies without ever having to face a quarterly earnings call, answer to a hostile journalist, or explain their motivations to the public. Decisions that impact a global workforce and 1 billion consumers are made behind its silent, anonymous walls. This institutionalized secrecy is not an accident. It is the core of their generational strategy. This ethos of reclusiveness was systematically passed down, hardening with each succession. It began as a practical business necessity for the founder, Roy, a way to avoid controversy and stay focused on the bottom line. For his son, Kenneth, this practicality morphed into a deeply ingrained personal preference, a way to shield his sensitive, scholarly nature from the harsh glare of the public eye. By the time the empire passed to the third generation, to David, this preference had solidified into an unbreakable, almost sacred doctrine. For children born into this world, the lesson is absorbed from the cradle. Privacy is the ultimate virtue. The outside world is a potential threat, and silence is the family's greatest strength. It is an indoctrination into a life of guardedness, a training in the art of being invisible. But this relentless pursuit of invisibility comes at a cost. The silence they so carefully cultivate creates a vacuum. And in a world hungry for information, a world their own company so ably serves, that vacuum is inevitably filled with speculation, conjecture, and a deep-seated public suspicion. Their refusal to be known, in an age that demands transparency, transforms their quiet influence into the perception of a shadowy, secret power. The very strategy they employ to protect themselves from scrutiny, ironically, makes them a subject of more intense and often more sinister curiosity. Their reclusiveness is not beyond the public perceptions lies the far more profound psychological cost of living within this gilded cage. The stories of Kenneth's retreat into the quiet, controllable world of his art collection and the persistent whispers of David's deep-seated solitude are not merely biographical quirks. They are symptoms of a profound and pervasive sense of alienation. Extreme wealth, as psychologists have noted, is often a powerful isolator. It creates an invisible but palpable barrier of otherness that can make the formation of normal, trusting human relationships incredibly difficult. Is a person's friendship genuine, or is it motivated by the immense fortune that surrounds you? This constant, corrosive doubt can lead to a life of profound loneliness, even when surrounded by people. For the Thomsons, this inherent isolation is amplified by the central paradox of their existence. They preside over an empire built on the very principles of connection, communication, and the dissemination of knowledge. Their terminals and news feeds link the world, yet their own personal lives are defined by disconnection, privacy, and a carefully guarded silence. Imagine the psychological dissonance of living in such stark contradiction, of profiting from the world's insatiable need to know while your own family's highest value is to remain unknown. It risks breeding a sense of deep detachment from the very world their business so meticulously analyzes and reports on, turning them into spectators of the human condition rather than participants. This detachment can have devastating consequences, even within the family itself. The painful 2017 lawsuit involving David Thomson and his estranged daughter, while a private matter, offers a rare and troubling glimpse into the potential for dysfunction within this high-pressure environment. When a family's primary interface is a labyrinth of complex legal trusts and financial agreements, relationships themselves can become transactional. The structures designed to preserve the family's wealth can, with tragic irony, end up corroding the emotional bonds of the family they are meant to serve. Love, affection, and understanding can get lost in the cold, hard language of contracts and shareholder agreements. Perhaps the most haunting window into this private struggle comes from David Thomson himself, in his startlingly vulnerable admission that traditional businessmen think you're not a real man if you live balanced. This is not the confident aphorism of a corporate titan. It is the raw, unguarded confession of a man grappling with the immense weight of his own legacy. It reveals a deep internal conflict between the ruthless, single-minded persona he believes he is expected to embody and a powerful yearning for a balanced, more authentic, more human existence. It is the quiet, desperate cry of a man who seems to recognize that his life, for all its material perfection, may be profoundly, psychologically out of balance. It is the sound of a man who has everything the world can offer except perhaps the one thing he truly needs. And so the Thomson story becomes a powerful exploration of human contradictions. We see a family of unparalleled influence that yields a legacy of emotional fragility. We see the very structures built to ensure generational security potentially fostering generational strife. At the center of this paradox is the role of art. For both Kenneth and David, their passionate, scholarly collecting was clearly more than a hobby or an investment. It was a lifeline. In a world dominated by the cold, hard numbers of finance and the enforced silence of their family ethos, art was their only acceptable language for emotion. It was a safe harbor, a way to engage with beauty, history, and the depths of the human experience without having to speak a word of it themselves. Their collections are their diaries, their confessions, their way of connecting with a richer world beyond the sterile confines of the boardroom. This contrast between their immense corporate power and their apparent personal fragility is the ultimate contradiction of their story. They have the financial might to move markets and the media influence to shape global discourse, yet they seem to grapple with the same fundamental human challenges that face us all: loneliness, the search for meaning, the struggle to build and maintain authentic connections. Their wealth did not solve these problems. In many ways, it seems to have amplified them. For the Thomson dynasty, wealth did not buy freedom in the conventional sense of the word. Instead, it purchased a more sophisticated, more comfortable, and perhaps more inescapable form of isolation. It allowed them to amplify their innate tendencies towards privacy until that privacy became a defining and arguably tragic characteristic of their dynasty. The great fortress they built over a century to protect their fortune may have succeeded beyond their wildest dreams, but in doing so, it may have cost them something far more valuable, something that once lost, no amount of money can ever buy back. Here's the fifth part of the story. This section moves from the family's internal world to the external controversies and debates their unique position of power and secrecy has inevitably provoked. When a family of ghosts presides over an empire of information, when immense generation-spanning power is deliberately shrouded in profound, impenetrable secrecy, a collision with the outside world is not just likely, it is inevitable. The story of the Thomson family is not merely a private drama of wealth and isolation. It is also a public case study, a focal point for one of the most critical and unresolved debates of our time: the role of concentrated private media ownership in a democratic society. The controversies that swirl around the Thomsons are not, for the most part, attacks on their personal character. Rather, they represent a legitimate and necessary inquiry into a structure of influence that is, by its very design, unaccountable to the public it serves. The scrutiny they face is the natural consequence of the paradox they have created. In their quest for the quiet life, they have inadvertently fueled a noisy and persistent debate about the nature of their power. To explore these controversies is to explore the inherent tension between the right to privacy and the public's right to know, especially when the subject in question owns a significant portion of the machinery that facilitates that knowledge. The central debate, the one that is echoed through regulatory bodies and university lecture halls for decades, revolves around a simple but profound question: can a single, unaccountable family be trusted with the stewardship of a vital global news organization? The critic's argument is built not on evidence of interference, but on the unnerving potential for it. Their 66% controlling stake, held through the opaque Woodbridge Company, gives them the ultimate power. They have the authority to hire and fire the chief executive and to approve the board of directors. Critics argue that this creates a subtle but powerful chilling effect, where executives and senior editors might, consciously or subconsciously, self-censor their decisions to align with the perceived interests of their silent, all-powerful owners. This concern is not merely theoretical. A 2012 probe by the European Union, while ultimately approving a Thomson Reuters acquisition, explicitly raised flags about the risks of such concentrated power, particularly regarding the potential for subtle prioritization of business-friendly coverage in the financial news sector, the company's most profitable area. The family's absolute opacity is the fuel for this fire. Because they never speak publicly, never articulate a journalistic vision, and never explain their philosophy, critics are left to fill the void. This lack of transparency in the eyes of many is a direct threat to journalistic accountability. How can the public trust a news organization when the ultimate motives of its owners remain a complete and total mystery? In their defense, the company and its supporters point to a powerful shield, a set of sacred commandments forged over a century ago, the Reuters Trust Principles. These are not just a vague mission statement. They are 5 core tenets: independence, integrity, and freedom from bias chief among them, that are legally embedded in the company's charter. They form a legal and ethical firewall designed to protect the newsroom from any influence, including from its owners. Supporters argue that this firewall has held for generations. They also point to the family's demonstrable track record. From Roy Thomson's earliest days, the family has maintained a nearly unbroken century-long history of non-interference. This history, they contend, is far more meaningful than any hypothetical scenario. Furthermore, many argue that the stability of long-term family ownership is, in fact, a powerful protection for quality journalism. Unlike media companies owned by hedge funds or beholden to the quarterly demands of Wall Street, the Thomsons can invest for the long term. They can weather economic storms and fund difficult, time-consuming investigative journalism without panicking about the next stock market report. In this view, their quiet, stable ownership is not a threat to journalism, but one of its last great bastions. And yet this brings us to the debate's current, 2025 context. The Reuters Institute's own digital news report consistently highlights a global crisis of falling trust in the media. In an age of deep public skepticism fueled by disinformation and social media echo chambers, is the traditional trust us. We have principles models still viable, especially when it comes from an ownership that demands trust us, but we will remain private? Or does the Thomson silence, however well-intentioned and historically justified, inadvertently contribute to the erosion of trust their own world-class journalists are so diligently reporting on? Beyond the theoretical debate over influence, the Thomson Reuters empire has faced specific, tangible controversies that test the ethical limits of its detached, profit-driven model. None has been more fraught than the one surrounding its massive data aggregation product, CLEAR. CLEAR is not a news product. It is a vast, powerful surveillance tool, a database that consolidates billions of data points, including sensitive personal information, which it then sells to law enforcement, government agencies, and private corporations. Beginning in 2019, controversy erupted when privacy advocates and immigrant rights groups alleged that reports from privacy advocates alleged that data from CLEAR was used by U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, ICE, in immigration enforcement. Claims that sparked heated public debate and scrutiny. This wasn't a case of biased news reporting. This was a case of the company's core data brokerage business, a business far larger and more profitable than its news division, being implicated in a fierce human rights debate. This placed the Thomson family at the epicenter of a profound ethical dilemma. The product was legal. The client was a legitimate government agency. But did the company, and by extension its owners, have a moral responsibility for how its powerful data tools were being used? The controversy was a brutal test of their hands-off philosophy. Thomson Reuters' official response was to defend Clear as a legitimate and vital tool for law enforcement, while simultaneously emphasizing their corporate commitment to data privacy and the ethical use of information. It highlighted the deep, often uncomfortable contradiction at the heart of their modern empire. A company that champions human rights through its foundation and its journalism, while also profiting from the sale of data that activists claim is used to violate those very rights. This tension between profit and principle is also at the heart of the next great frontier, artificial intelligence. Thomson Reuters is not merely adopting AI. It is a major developer, aggressively integrating it into its legal and journalistic products. Their own 2025 reports and white papers champion the potential of AI to revolutionize these fields. But with this pioneering role comes a host of ethical landmines. There are the concerns of inherent data bias, where AI systems trained on historical data perpetuate past societal prejudices. There is the threat of job displacement for the very journalists and legal professionals their products are meant to serve, and there is the black box problem, the unsettling reality that sometimes even the creators of an I do not fully understand how it reaches a particular conclusion. For a brand like Reuters, whose entire value is built on a century of trust, accuracy, and transparency, this presents a monumental challenge. How can you guarantee the integrity of your information when it is being created or curated by an algorithm whose decision-making processes may be opaque? This is the 21st century iteration of the family's central challenge: how to manage a technologically complex, ever-evolving information empire while upholding the timeless principles of fairness and accountability. These modern dilemmas echo older, more traditional conflicts. During the 2008 merger, a culture clash was inevitable. Thomson was a lean, corporate, profit-focused machine. Reuters was a more traditional, journalist-centric, and heavily unionized organization. The union alarms that sounded at the time were not just about jobs. They were about a deep-seated fear that the profit-first Thomson culture would inexorably lead to budget cuts and a subtle erosion of journalistic values in the relentless corporate pursuit of synergies. While the Reuters trust principles were preserved as a condition of the deal, the post-merger company did indeed see significant restructuring and layoffs. A classic and painful example of the perpetual tension between the financial imperatives of a global corporation and the cultural values of its newsroom. What is striking, after decades of intense scrutiny from regulators, academics, and activists, is that there has never been a smoking gun. No leaked memo from a Thomson family member has ever surfaced ordering a story to be killed or spun. No whistleblower has ever emerged with definitive proof of editorial interference from the Woodbridge Company. The case against them has always been, and remains, built on the unsettling what if. The family's relationship with the news business is itself not static. In 2021, reports surfaced of internal family frustrations that were pushing for talks about divesting parts of the news business. This small detail is incredibly revealing. It shows that the family's legendary pragmatism is alive and well. It suggests that they sometimes question the value of owning such a high-profile, relatively low-margin asset compared to their ever-expanding data businesses. This leaves the entire debate in a permanent, unresolved state of tension. The critics argue that the burden of proof lies with the Thomsons. They must prove that their structure of secret power is not a threat to the public good. The family's silent, unstated position seems to be that their nearly century-long track record of non-interference speaks for itself, and their privacy is absolute and non-negotiable. And so the argument circles endlessly. Their profound reclusiveness means the case against them must always be built on circumstantial evidence and theoretical fears, while the case for them is built on a history that is, by its very nature, quiet, undocumented, and ultimately a matter of trust. We have journeyed through the heart of an empire and the private world of the family that commands it. We have traced the how, the relentless, pragmatic rise from a single small-town radio station to a global information behemoth. We have explored the who, the distinct generational personalities of the founder, the inheritor, and the guardian. We have delved into the why, the deep psychological drivers of a reclusiveness so profound it became a dynastic creed. And we have examined the what, the persistent, unresolved controversies that their silence and secrecy inevitably attract. Now we arrive at the final, most crucial question. So what? What is the lasting aftermath of this century-long saga? In the turbulent, supersaturated, and deeply skeptical information landscape of 2025, what is the true significance of the Thomson family's silent reign? To answer this, we must look at the indelible marks, emotional, cultural, and political, that this extraordinary dynasty has left upon our world. Perhaps the most unexpected and deeply human of the Thomson legacies is an unintentional one. Their story in its entirety serves as one of the modern world's most powerful cautionary tales about the hidden costs of extreme wealth. In an age that often glorifies the billionaire lifestyle, the Thomson narrative offers a sobering counterpoint, a multi-generational case study in how absolute material success provides no guarantee of personal fulfillment or human connection. Their journey humanizes the abstract concept of wealth, revealing its profound potential to isolate, to complicate, and to create burdens as heavy as any it alleviates. This internal contradiction finds its most public expression in the work of the Thomson Reuters Foundation. Here, the family's immense resources are deployed in a very public and often very noble mission. The foundation is a global leader in supporting a free press, training journalists in hostile environments, fighting human trafficking through legal and investigative initiatives, and promoting human rights worldwide. It is a powerful force for good, an institution dedicated to shining a light in the world's darkest corners. And yet, this noble work exists in stark, almost jarring contrast to the profound and absolute privacy of the family that funds it. This philanthropic paradox is central to their modern legacy. Is it an attempt to balance a karmic ledger? A way for a deeply private family to engage with the world's most pressing problems from a safe institutional distance, contributing their capital but never their voice? Whatever the motivation, it represents a complex negotiation between the desire for anonymity and the responsibilities of immense power. Culturally, their impact, particularly within their home nation, is undeniable. Through their long-standing stewardship of the Globe and Mail, often called Canada's national newspaper, they have played a significant and lasting role in shaping Canadian political and cultural discourse. And Kenneth Thomson's spectacular donation of his art collection to the Art Gallery of Ontario was more than just a gift. It was a foundational act that permanently transformed Toronto's cultural landscape, a legacy of quiet beauty that will endure for centuries. But their greatest legacy is structural and global. By masterminding the pivot from the volatile world of newspapers to the stable, essential world of data, the Thomsons became the quiet architects of the invisible infrastructure that runs the 21st century knowledge economy. The legal precedent a lawyer cites in Mumbai, the financial data a trader analyzes in Frankfurt, the scientific paper a researcher accesses in Sao Paulo, the veins and arteries of this global information flow often run through platforms built and owned by the Thomson Empire. We all live and work within a system they were instrumental in creating, whether we are aware of it or not. It is this structural power that places the Thomson legacy squarely at the center of the most critical political and social challenges of 2025. In an era defined by the rise of sophisticated AI-generated content and the relentless plague of disinformation, the value of trusted, verified, and impartial news sources like Reuters has never been higher. They are a bulwark against the chaos. And yet, the Thomson story also serves as a stark and timely warning. Even with a benevolent and historically hands-off owner, the sheer concentration of so much information power within a single, private, and unaccountable family represents a structural risk to a healthy democracy. In a world where information is routinely weaponized by state and non-state actors, the family's model of unaccountable stewardship becomes more problematic, regardless of their demonstrably good intentions. Their story teaches us a vital lesson for our time. In the arena of global information, a diversity of voices and transparent ownership are not just abstract ideals, they are essential democratic safeguards against the potential for misuse that secret power will always present. The lessons from their century-long journey are manifold. For the world of business, it is a masterclass in the power of a long-term vision, of fiscal pragmatism, and of the strategic value of occupying the quiet, unglamorous, but essential corners of an industry. For society, it is a powerful argument for the critical need to support a pluralistic media landscape, to ensure that no single entity, no matter how responsible, holds too much influence over the information we consume. And for us as individuals, it is a poignant and deeply human reminder to seek a life that balances ambition with connection, success with self-awareness, lest we, too, find ourselves in a fortress of our own making. With their family fortune estimated at more than $50 billion, the Thomsons remain among the wealthiest families in the world, and their financial power continues to grow. The debates they provoke are not historical artifacts. They are the very debates we are all grappling with today in the context of big tech, social media censorship, and the regulation of our digital world. The Thomson family does not just own a company, they are a living embodiment of the most complex questions about power, privacy, and public responsibility in the modern age. And so we conclude our journey. We have traced the incredible arc of an empire from a $201 investment born of Depression-era desperation to a global powerhouse worth over $50 billion, driven increasingly by AI and data innovation. We have seen how this meteoric corporate rise was perpetually, inextricably intertwined with the family's deliberate descent into a deep and protected reclusiveness. This is their ultimate legacy, a story of triumph and tragedy, of connection and isolation, a story that created both one of the world's most respected information brands and a lingering, unshakable public suspicion. The emotional and moral lessons of their saga are as profound as their fortune. In their story, we see the fragile, fleeting beauty of power, forever vulnerable to the quiet, corrosive pain of isolation. We are reminded that the structures we build to protect ourselves can also become our prisons, and that no amount of wealth can purchase a genuine human connection. Their story makes a quiet but urgent moral call for a new understanding of stewardship in the information age, one that recognizes that the control of a global news organization is a profound public trust, a trust that simply cannot be sustained from behind a permanent and impenetrable veil of secrecy. This was, in the end, not just the story of a corporation. It was the story of a family, of a grandfather's relentless ambition, a father's quiet sensitivity, and a son's lonely, unending burden as the guardian of a silent throne. We are left, then, with the final enduring paradox of the Thomson family. In our hyper-connected world, a world they were instrumental in wiring together, does their immense, hidden, and unaccountable influence ultimately serve to stabilize and inform the societies it reports on? Or does it, by its very nature, subtly undermine the trust and transparency that those societies need to survive? Their story provides no easy answers. Instead, it leaves us with a deeper, more grounded understanding of the question itself, a question that will continue to resonate as long as information is power, and as long as those who wield it grapple with the timeless human struggle between the world they own and the one in which they truly live.